Welcome, everybody, to the Superstory Vidcast. My name is Houston Howard. These are my two business partners, Brad Lusher and the illustrious T-Rev. T-Rev, do people typically refer to you as illustrious, or is that just me?
That's the first time I've got illustrious, but I'll take that. I'll receive it.
That'll work. That'll work. So, like we do with the previous episodes of the Zoom sessions, we're in the midst of a 2020 coronavirus COVID-19 quarantine. So we're doing the Zoom sessions. So let's talk about our backgrounds, our virtual backgrounds, because that's like part and parcel of Zoom these days. And so today's topic, just as an aside, is how do we have a big vision, but at the same time execute on a micro level, in a small level that can allow us to generate as much content as possible. So in that, talk to me about your virtual backgrounds. Brad, what do you got behind you there?
I have a large macro vision behind me.
What is that?
Sweeping valley in LA.
Oh, okay.
You know, I like to go hiking out here, go up to the top, look out over the city and ponder things, you know.
I like it. Okay, cool. T-Rev, what do you got behind you?
What I have is the rather large hand, which symbolizes your macro story, the grand vision, holding a number of small, tiny books, which symbolize the micro stories that should exist in that grand vision.
I like how you went for like specifically right to the metaphor, right? Just like you just encapsulated not just a piece of it, the entire metaphor into one thing. I like that. That's well done, T-Rev.
Well done.
Yeah. So my virtual background is a scene from Star Wars. This is an early scene from A New Hope, set on Tatooine. And so the reason I have a Star Wars background is because, as we'll talk about tonight, as you do execute small, it's also important to have that big vision. And I can't think of a bigger vision than without thinking of George Lucas and sort of the vision he had for that. So that is always a fun thing to think about. So cool. So that's our virtual backgrounds. But the meat of our conversation is around this idea of how do we execute small in today's market. I think right now, because we're in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, this is reshuffling a lot of stuff. We talked about it on a previous episode. It's really resetting the board in a lot of ways. But what also is happening right now is the economy is taking obviously a major hit. Just read today that over 50% of adults in LA are unemployed right now because of the pandemic, which is wild. And so what happens when markets begin to shake? Also, just as a I don't know if you've noticed gas prices recently. They're like gas prices they're gas prices that I'm used to in Kentucky, right, or Ohio gas prices, right? It's really this incredible thing, and because no one's driving because of the pandemic, gas prices are super low, which means oil is being used less, which means we now have an overproduction of oil, which means the oil markets are crashing because oil is worth less because of supply and demand. And so anybody that has large investments into oil and natural gas are really taking a major hit, let alone the hit that people are taking with their investments in film and entertainment. So all that sort of wraps up in this really interesting marketplace that we have right now, which we still want to create content. We still have things to do, but especially for independent creators, people may be pulling the purse strings a little tighter, right? They may be pulling back the money.
Yeah.
Money may be harder to find these days than before. Studio acquisitions, the prediction is that they're going to slow down in the fall because they have a backlog of projects that weren't able to be released during the summer. And so what do we do in the interim? We the tendency is to just try to wait it out. But there's such an importance and a practicality to executing on what we have in front of us right now. And we live in such an amazing time where the technology has been democratized in such an incredible way that we get to sit at home, especially during a pandemic, and we have access to 10 to 15 to 52 different platforms that give us free worldwide distribution and connect us to a zillion people across the planet. We have access to that stuff every day, and there's an importance to be able to leverage those things. But far too people do. Why do you think that is? What do you guys have any thoughts around that?
Why they're not leveraging?
Yeah. Why don't you think people are leveraging these platforms as much as they can? I mean, what's the friction?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's the mindset, and when I'm talking about mindset, we have a number of people that we know who come out to Los Angeles. Whether you live here or you're coming here to make it big.
Sure.
You're thinking big movies, you're thinking big album, you're thinking TV show, right? And that's where your mindset is. So you start thinking of these smaller channels where you can have story and your vision exists, and it doesn't line up with what you thought you were going to be doing in Hollywood or
Sure.
New York on the big screen. And we make a huge mistake in failing to leverage these things, because it's these small stories. It's leveraging where are the people at? What are they consuming that lead to where the big guys, the big studios, the record companies are finding what they like, what they want to make into the big thing. So we have to rearrange our thought process and learn how to leverage these platforms, learn how to have them fit in our story, learn how they can build community.
That's an interesting point. I mean, I think you're right about that. I think it's humility problem in a lot of ways, right? And I think, so if anybody doesn't know us yet, all three of us are big sports fans, and so I typically try to weave as many sports analogies into everything that I ever do as humanly possible. But it's interesting, like in football, right? When you're in middle school and you're playing sort of middle school JFL type football, you dream of playing on Friday night as a high school football player, and then once you're playing on Friday night, you dream of playing on Saturdays, right? And so you can be a college player, and then once you're playing on Saturdays, your dream is to play on Sundays. And to be an NFL player. Then when you're playing on Sundays, your dream is to play on Monday, right? So you can have that Monday night football experience. And once you get up there, right? Like once you get to that top tier, it would be hard to move backwards, right? Like I don't want to go back to sort of these lower tiers of football or whatever it is. And I think maybe that mindset is the mindset that you're talking about. The creators have is maybe they have this thinking that I'm doing short films today, but that's playing football on Friday, right? Or I'm doing a web series that's like on Saturday. Once I have the taste of a feature film, or once I have the taste of a novel, or once I have the taste of a full album, I don't want to. It feels like a reversion, Brad, to go back to sort of these smaller platforms,
right.
That would kind of frustrate them, and I think it's a humility problem.
Yeah, and I think we've seen examples of people that have approached it the right way in the past. So as a lover of independent cinema, the couple of people jump to mind. One is Robert Rodriguez,
sure,
who he started small with a large vision. So he started with El Mariachi,
right,
shot that super cheap, and was able to parlay that into Desperado and a lot of these other larger films. But then he ended up realizing that it was actually pretty restricting to work with Hollywood.
Sure.
So he goes and just makes his own studio, and he's been doing his independent productions for a while now.
Sure. Yeah.
It also reminds me of Steven Soderbergh, who I saw he's on the committee now of big Hollywood types that are making the determination about when they're going to start opening theaters and opening up productions and things like that.
Right.
It just reminded me about him. So he's another guy who started, on the independent track, with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, really, really cheap production where he was being innovative, saying, all right, I don't have the budget for a huge film,
Right.
so I'm going to incorporate in my story using actual videotape instead of film, And then he worked his way up through the 90s to doing some of the top productions, but he ended up realizing he didn't want Hollywood telling him what to do either, and he started looking into, digital filmmaking. And then even I think he was the first one to shoot a feature on the iPhone and things like that.
Sure.
So it's like, yeah, I mean, when people think about the entertainment industry, they want to make the big Marvel film and they want to make, the Star Wars and the giant budgets. But there's a lot of great storytellers and filmmakers that have realized that actually it's better to strip it down and do it the way you'd like, and get the story out the way you want in a smaller means.
Sure. And I think the way the market is right now, to go for something big like a feature, like a full television series, or sort of the big stuff right off the bat that requires the heavier investment, the console video game, the full blown worldwide tour and music, things like that. To go for that right off the bat and to wait to create for that, I think is an ignorance of how the market works. Because and you alluded to this, T-Rev, where the market really is based on who has the audience and how do we generate pre-awareness of the market. And that's the thing that allows the studios and record labels and sort of the video game publishers to really get excited about you and your project is have you generated pre-awareness of the market. Now, 20 years ago, it was very difficult for anybody to generate pre-awareness of the market outside of a novel, right? So the whole based on a book phenomenon, sort of, that's what that is, right? They don't care about books as much as they care about the audience for a book. But now what is so amazing is that we have 100 different platforms that can get us audience, right? We have a direct pipeline to audience. And what's amazing is they're on digital platforms that allow us to pull together the analytics, right? We can actually have data that we point to. And so I always, again, going back to the sports analogy, I always think that trying to sell a project or get an investment or to do something without some sort of pre-established pre-awareness in the market is very akin to kind of sticking back to on your own 1 yard line, throwing a Hail Mary all the way down the field, right? It's just like so rare that ever happens. Maybe somebody does actually catch the ball once in a while. But if people would just figure out how to leverage the small platforms and do like the off tackle run for 3 yards and the dump down pass that gets them 2 yards and the screen pass that gets them 4 yards, if they continue to do that, then they may move themselves up to the 50 before they throw the Hail Mary. I'd rather throw a Hail Mary on the 50 than the one any day. You can tell I'm starved for sports at this point in our pandemic. Right?
Matter of fact, if you're looking to make a touchdown, let's equate the touchdown to the big Hollywood deal, since we're on this sports analogy, because I was thinking about the Hail Mary. There's an amazing quarterback in football named Aaron Rodgers. And just a few years ago, he threw 2 Hail Marys in 2 consecutive playoff games, important games that could get you to the Super Bowl.
Sure.
But he didn't win the Super Bowl. But there is the most famous quarterback, the most illustrious, decorated quarterback is a guy named Tom Brady, who is known for dinking and dunking, meaning he'll take 5 yards here, he'll take 3 yards here, and he's done that to the tune of 6 Super Bowls, the most in history.
Sure.
So you liken that to using the smaller stories, the smaller platforms,
100%.
building up your audience to win 6 Super Bowls. It will get you down the field. It will get you where you want to go. You just got to get that mindset.
It's funny. It reminds me of back when we were kids. If a director wanted to make some waves in Hollywood and get recognized, a lot of times they would start with music videos. So when MTV was the hot platform at the time. So if you could get in tight with an artist, and be able to shoot their music video for them, now all of a sudden Hollywood saw you and they wanted to give you a chance to do TV, do a feature, things like that.
Sure.
So I think now for today's entertainment, you're going to want to look around what platforms are available today.
Sure.
So it's a litany of free platforms available where you can now start playing in that sandbox and start building an audience and start working on getting recognized if you want to build something bigger.
Talk about some of those.
Two of my favorite examples of this is one in music and another just on as a YouTube series. On the YouTube one is I don't know if you guys have seen the show The Hot Ones, an interview show where you have a guy whoever he interviews, they just eat hot wings, and the hot wings are in increasing levels of heat as the interview goes, right? And so he's interviewing celebrities while they eat hot wings, and then they're getting hotter every plate, and you just see there's a novelty in seeing when the celebrities are going to tap out, right? But it's an actual like legit interview, and what's amazing about that, if anybody watches the Hot Ones, it's very low budget production. It's very stripped down. The guy's not even the greatest interviewer of all time, but there's a concept there that he leveraged on YouTube. It blew up on YouTube, and he's just been working it and working it and working it and working it. And he just got called up on True TV for a full game show, right? And now they're doing a complete legit game show based on the Hot Ones.
That's awesome.
And what's great is there's a lot of people out there that want to sell a game show, and they would be shopping their game show the entire time and for years not being able to sell their game show. While if they would have started just on YouTube and built that audience up, then all of a sudden in the same amount of time, right, or maybe even sooner, then they would have been able to leverage that audience into something more. Lil Nas X is another great example in music with Old Town Road. I mean, Old Town Road is such a, it's the longest standing #1 Billboard song in history. I think it was 17 weeks at #1. It's incredible. And it's sort of like this goofy song, right? It's sort of like super hooky, but it's a weird genre blend. He's sort of a weirdo, goofy guy. And he couldn't, A&R people wouldn't give him the time of day because, it's just very irregular to the industry. And so he went to TikTok and intentionally memed himself on TikTok. And within a month or two, had 100 million TikTok shares of his song, where people were doing a funny little dance called the Yee Juice Challenge. And he turned it, and it's this incredible thing. If you haven't seen the Yee Juice Challenge, it's like it's people are dancing, and then they drink some water, and then as soon as they drink the water, the beat drops, and it hard cuts to them sort of in a cowboy outfit, and they just do a funny little cowboy dance to his song. Once he had 100 million people sharing sharing the TikTok, then guess what happened? He got signed by the record labels that he was the same record labels he was pitching to previously. So it's not that they hated his song, or maybe they did hate his song, but they hated his lack of pre-awareness more. And once he generated that pre-awareness in the marketplace with a smaller platform, he was able to flip that into something bigger. This dramatically interesting story that I think is a testament to everybody.
I would hope that they hated his song, because what that tells you is sometimes you have to make your own path out here and prove people wrong. There's people sitting up in suits, and it's about a fraction of a fraction of a fraction percentage of the people, and you have something that you feel that will genuinely hit with enough of an audience. And one of the things you mentioned at the top of the podcast was, I think you mentioned about building community. TikTok is a perfect channel to use, platform to use to build community, because one of the things it does is it allows people to interact, allows people to take your song or take a dance and they do their version. Everybody wants to be their own star. And then you helping to create other mini stars on this, you build a whole community. It starts making noise to the business.
Right.
It goes back to Zig Ziglar, help other people get what they want, and you'll get everything that you want in life.
100%.
So that community aspect in some of these smaller channels lend itself to that.
And I think you're right, getting people what they want. So it's about, finding what that audience is that you can really lean into and helping provide some value to them. So one of my favorite examples, going back to building that YouTube audience, and this was maybe 10 years ago, when I was, learning how to do little special effects and stuff at home.
Sure.
I came across this YouTube channel of these college kids that were basically releasing short videos of them doing little special effects scenes. Sometimes like right outside of their apartment, and so but it was awesome. Like gun blasts and like different types of special effects that they would show you how to do it, and then they would show you the result.
Sure.
And so I was learning how to do fight scenes and different type of special effects from these guys. And all along the way, they were building their channel audiences pretty high because people were getting value, and they were fun videos they were making. They're entertaining.
Sure.
And I followed them for a couple of years, and then it got to the point where they had so much of an audience that they were able to release a feature film on Netflix. That because people at Netflix found them and really liked their stuff, and they were able to leverage their audience to raise to crowdfund to be able to create a feature, and then they sold it to Netflix, and you were able to watch it on Netflix.
The most powerful thing that you could ever create and get and have in entertainment is audience, right? It's nothing else than audience. And what you see now is audience is more important than even quality or talent. If you have audience, you have leverage, right? You shift that risk analysis back into your favor. I mean, if you look at even somebody like Nicki Minaj. Nicki Minaj got a disproportionately high advance in the music industry with Atlantic Records, and I'll get your take on this, Trav. I don't think it was because she was disproportionately more talented than everybody. I think she came into the game with extremely high pre-awareness and audience because she was a huge star on Instagram. She was on that For Love and Hip Hop show. She, of course, she has a great personality and the whole deal, right? Which help feed these things. But I think we could all probably agree that Atlantic Records probably could have signed 100 artists that may have higher talent levels than her, but she had such amazing pre-awareness that she was able to leverage a better deal for herself. And this isn't a knock on Nicki Minaj. I'm actually more impressed with people with less talent that ended up like making it huge, because it shows that they understand how to hustle, right? They're not sort of just trading on their talent. So this is actually a backhanded compliment to her. But it's such an interesting thing. And I don't think that audience and pre-awareness is an entertainment thing. I think it's an investment thing, right? So I don't know if do either of you guys watch Shark Tank?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, love Shark Tank, right? The first question that is always asked, when the people come out and say, we're looking for a $250,000 private equity investment into our new toothbrush business or whatever, and they go through the thing and they do their spiel, and then when the sharks get in, one of the first two questions that's asked is always, how many have you sold? What are your sales? Right? And there's a reason that question always comes first. Right? They're trying to gauge, do you already have an audience? Because if you have a baked in audience already, it makes the risk analysis for the investment go lower. Right? So I could have, if I have a toothbrush that I want to get an investment into, and they say, how many have you sold? And I say none. I need your investment so that I can make it, so I can sell it. Of course, that makes sense, right? I probably won't get that investment. It's not because I don't have a great toothbrush. It's because I'm too risky, right? But T-Rev, if you go in and with a toothbrush that isn't as good as mine, but you can say I sold 80,000 independently on my Shopify store last year, right? You have a greater chance of getting that investment, even though your toothbrush isn't as good as mine, just simply because you've shifted the risk analysis back to your favor, right? Because of your pre-awareness. It's an investment.
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah. It definitely, like whether someone, I think if you're low talent, mid talent, high talent, the audience is going to make a huge difference. I think Nicki Minaj, she writes her own stuff. She does have amazing flow to beat. Yeah. But what really helped is there's a lot of people who are like that, who are in the basement, so to speak,
sure,
that have amazing talent. They get like 10 views on their YouTube or rap that they put out, but that didn't, okay, can you get more? Because this person who has lesser talent, or they may have the same talent, somehow has this audience. I want to hedge my bets, I want to hedge it on that,
Sure.
because the one with the audience, I'm the one investing, putting up the money. I need to know what I'm putting this into. And so that's the mindset of people. And that's exactly why using some of these platforms, you don't have to have the big bucks and have the big production to create something that
You know,
millennial, Gen Z people like. You don't.
it always reminds me whenever we talk about MC Hammer. You know, when we were growing up, he was huge. But what most people don't know that Travis likes to talk about is, you know, before he made it big, he had his demo tapes in his trunk.
Sure.
Yeah.
And he was driving up and down the coast of California trying to sell it at gigs and wherever he could, you know. And so now we have a digital trunk. Everyone has their content on free social platforms. Like, that's your trunk. You need to be selling that demo wherever you can, you know?
100%, man. 100%. What I love, the number one board game in the world right now is Exploding Kittens. And it was created by this guy, Elon Lee. And he actually is sort of a really, say a big name in the transmedia community. He used to be involved with Fourth Wall Studios and sort of like those early ARGs they used to do. So he created a game called Exploding Kittens, and he raised the money on Kickstarter, and it just like went crazy on Kickstarter. And he started pushing this, and so it's the number one game of the world, right? He just started selling it completely independently, and now there's a variety podcast about him, where now film and television investment companies are coming to him and saying, how do we then create sort of the broader IP? How do we create film and television, cartoons, feature films, et cetera, not because they love his idea as much as they love the massive audience that he's created for himself. And he did it all through just a board game on Kickstarter, right? So the two hottest things that are being optioned right now in film and television are short stories on Wattpad and podcasting. Right, like narrative podcasts are massively popular, right? And Wattpad is like short, like it's YouTube for short stories, right? But if you can if you can point and say I have 100 million people who've read my short story on Wattpad, that audience now is vitally important to flip into something bigger and something more important. So there's so many things that we can do.
It's like you were saying, like, old Hollywood, they went to book sales, because that was the medium that people could consume in their homes. So before television and video on demand and all this, like, people had a book in their house when they weren't going to the movie theater.
Right.
So people were looking, Hollywood was looking to see who's selling the most books.
Sure.
What stories are resonating, and then let's option that and make something out of it.
Yep.
But now with these internet platforms where you can write a story and get it out there to the masses, that's where the aggregators are looking.
So Houston, I'm going to play the layman on this real quick, for as if I was a writer of some sort, and I want to write, I want to get exposure. So you're saying that I can go to this platform, Wattpad,
yes,
and I have a story idea, and I can start. I can upload my first chapter, or to upload the whole book. What are some of the processes that you can do to get your story released on that platform?
Sure, super easy. I mean, it's so easy. A Steelers fan could understand it, right? So it's you like literally you write a short story and just go and upload it. Set up an account and upload it, right? And it's there. And if it's good, people will read it, right? And so the talent does still have something to do with it. But yeah, it's super easy, right? And if you can't figure out how to use it, there's this website that you can go to that teaches you how to do anything in the world. It's google.com. Just type that in and say, how do I publish a story on Wattpad? There's going to be 17 articles staring you on the face in the front page of Google. That's going to walk you through it. There's a YouTube video, I'm sure, about it, right? It's just as easy as uploading a YouTube video. But the problem is I don't think it's the technology. It's people don't want to take the time to write the short story or learn how to write a short story or take the master class that teaches you how to write a good short story, right? To learn the medium of short film that allows you to make an effective short film. I think it's a humility problem. It's a lack of patience problem, right? Because what people do is if they have a feature film script that they're peddling around town, And if they never sell that, they can say somewhere in a bar, somewhere 20 years down the road, well, you know, Hollywood's all about who you know. You got to know people to know people to know people to know people. If anybody would have made my movie, it'd have been amazing. I'd have won an Oscar, but I didn't know the right people. I wasn't privileged enough to be able to be in the right circles, and so they kept me out, right? And you get to have the excuse as to why you didn't make it. Now there is no excuse, because if you're actually good enough, right, you can get the content to people and have them respond. I think people are afraid. What if I actually put myself out there and nobody likes it? Right?
Yeah.
It reminds me of that story we talked about before, where it was a letter from one of the founding fathers, and he wrote this long, this multiple page letter.
Sure.
And in the letter, he's apologizing. He's like, "I'm sorry, I didn't have enough time to write a short letter."
Yeah, exactly.
Basically, he had to just dump out his ideas on the page, and didn't have time to really boil down the main ideas and concepts and give something truncated. So yeah, you're right. People need to learn how to. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to go on a short form platform." You have to think it through 100%. And figure out how to get that message across based on the medium that you're using.
Yeah, and so go ahead, Trev.
Also, it brings to mind. I looked up the scripture. I also looked up a scripture, Luke 16:10. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much.
That's good.
And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So it's going to be, you're delivering short form content. It's readily available. Very evident. Like, do you have the storytelling skills or not? And I think you're right. People are scared. They don't want to be exposed. They want to keep the idea in their mind instead of just going ahead and producing and getting those reps.
100% right.
So I think that leads people back to someone may be listening that's thinking like, well, my end goal was a movie, or my end goal was to get a show bought by Netflix or Amazon Prime. But what's interesting is that these, with Wattpad having that first look deal with Sony, they're optioning these deals into films and to TV shows. So, and people aren't thinking like that. And I think if you come in, you're saying, hey, my story doesn't fit that medium, that platform that you're talking about. But I think if we kind of talk to people out there about having a big macro story, that can house a bunch of smaller stories and has a very rich world, you can take one of those, a portion of in that macro, make a portion of it micro, and put it on a smaller platform, so that the big guys of Hollywood will then want to go make the macro.
100%.
All that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And this is like, listen, now, admittedly, and Brad, we used to debate this all the time years before, right? Is when we were younger men and could actually see each other face to face. We would debate this on sort of our early days when we moved out here. Is I have always historically been anti short form content, right? If we time traveled back to 10 years ago, Houston would have been very much, let's just do the feature, let's just hit it, let's just hit it hard, right? And part of my problem, well, we didn't have the platforms that we do today, right? But part of my problem was a creative one, is that I felt like the investment into a short film or a web series, I felt like it was a waste of time. Not in honing my craft, right? Of course, you do a short film and it just helps you be a better filmmaker. You do a short story, it's going to help you be a better writer. If you just cut that single rather than the whole album, it's going to hone your craft into whatever you're doing. So I've always understood that. Here's what I didn't like as a writer. I didn't like the investment into story and to characters and to concept that I ultimately knew would never grow beyond that. I ultimately knew that there's nowhere else to go with this thing, and it's a small idea, I know, but I'll never do anything with these characters ever again, because this is like a small idea that just exists in this one thing. And I think this is the trap that a lot of people get into. And listen, on the other end with that, and I think we could all talk about it, is we have we have been just as bad about this historically as other people that we're talking about. We had a feature film script several years ago that we developed. We started as a board game. Remember, we developed it as a board game. Then we developed the feature film to go along with the board game. We had a lot of things in development. We then had that feature film, got a lot of motion behind that feature film, the feature film script, got it to Fox, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Didn't work out with Fox, ended up coming back to us, right? So Fox never produced it. We ended up getting it back. And we look back on that and trying to hustle that feature film. We look back and we're like, wow, we're like 7 years down the road now. What if, and now we don't have anything to show for it because they ultimately didn't produce it and went back to us, right? What if we would have been for the 7 year period, instead of waiting for this to move into production with the studio, what if we'd have been leveraging podcast, short story, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Twitch, all these different things? What if we'd been leveraging building audience? We would have spent the same exact 7 years waiting, except then 7 years down the road, we have something that we didn't have then, which would have been audience, right? Like we just went for the Hail Mary on our first play.
And the thing
on a scrimmage.
We did have, we were developing a comic book with it. We were developing music, and we had the beginnings of some of these other smaller offerings that could have been released. At the time, a lot of these platforms didn't exist.
Right? 100%. But we were waiting. We were waiting on somebody to swoop in to finance everything, to write us the big check, and listen, we had a receiver open running down the field, right? Like we saw it, right? And ultimately it didn't work as 1,000 people have the exact same stories about everything, right? And it's just a normal part of the business. But if we had just been leveraging these small platforms that entire time, it'd been a whole different deal for us.
And we are guilty, because I remember, Brad, I don't know if you went with me, but you guys sent me to a digital a comic seminar.
Yes.
Yes. I was the only black guy in there. Definitely the race man in jar. What am I doing here? No.
Yeah. You're probably the best dressed guy there.
I was definitely the best.
Yeah, 100%.
But I was learning. I'm sitting there taking notes. And I think our mistake, and hopefully this will help someone else out there, was not innovating. I mean, Netflix created their own lane. They took out Blockbuster. They made a lane, and people out there have to make their lanes. Now there's a bunch of platforms that you can make your own lanes. But we weren't thinking of, all right, let's get the digital comic. Let's build up an audience with that.
That's it.
There's a side story that we have for that, and we didn't leverage it. I mean, I thought by now I'd be Denzel status, because I thought I'd have a supporting role in the film. We're sitting there in the Fox studios. I saw grander visions. I didn't want to go to be in a comic. I wanted.
We were thinking multi-platform. We were thinking transmedia, right? So we were thinking transmedia the entire time. But we weren't thinking micro. We weren't thinking micro execution, right? So this is the trap that I think people fall in, is that they think if my idea is big, if I have a big vision, then the only thing I can do is execute big. So a big vision, a big idea, a big concept has to be executed in a big console video game that takes $35 million to produce in 5 years down the road. I need it to be a TV series. I need it to be a $200 million movie. I need it to be something big, right? Because it's a big idea. Or if I know I'm going to do a short film, or I want to do a web series or a short story, it needs to be a small idea for small execution, big idea, big execution. I think that is exactly wrong, right? I think that the sweet spot here is, let's figure out how to have a big vision, a big idea. And then once we have that big idea, figure out how to execute small, right, within that big idea. Create the sandbox of the big idea, the big concept, the big story world, but then find that the short film, the short story, the single, the whatever it is that you can do, like on a small budget or on zero budget, leveraging all these platforms. Figure out how to start there, because when you execute well, inside a big vision, you now have an organic growth plan, right? Like it's going to, you now have the ability to scale. One of my favorite examples of this is with The Purge, right? The Purge is a big idea. It's a big high concept, big story world, big everything, right? But if you go back and watch the very first film of The Purge, I don't know if you guys had seen it. It was very frustrating for me when I watched that movie because the whole thing is set inside a house. And whenever you see anything set in a movie set just in a singular location of a house, it's primarily just a cost saving mechanism. It's a low budget. It's a low budget movie, right? They can't pay for all these other things. And so that frustrated me because I wanted to go explore the broader story world. I wanted to go outside and figure out what's going on outside, but they didn't. Now, because they didn't have the money to. Now, here's what always impressed me about that project is they didn't say, you know what? This is a big idea we have, and we have a small budget. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to save our big idea for whenever we have a big budget, and we'll just scale this singular movie down to crazy people trying to kill somebody inside a house, and that's it, right? But they didn't say that. So that rather they said, you know what? We're going to keep the big idea. We're going to keep the big vision. We're going to keep that big story world concept, and we're going to execute on a micro budget for the first movie. And then once it hit, guess what happened with The Purge 2? They went outside, right? They just sort of grew this thing into a TV series and all this stuff that they're doing today. Yeah. And so we're talking about that not even now on a multi-platform level of how do you have sort of the big story world idea, that big vision, that like the grand plan, but then kind of walk it back to say, what's my starting point? And where can I start this right now? Building audience right now. Right? With podcast, Wattpad, Twitch, Instagram, YouTube, understanding the language of all those platforms. And there's Trav, you know him, Bernie Sue. Bernie Sue is sort of a transmedia guy. And he runs in the transmedia communities. He created the Lizzie Bennett Diaries from back in the day. He's doing the first TV show on Twitch, the TV show on Twitch that is really super interesting. But he said it best when he said, I didn't want to create a show and put it on Twitch. He said, I wanted to create a show that could only be told on Twitch. And so nice. I thought it was a really interesting way to kind of nuance the understanding of when you go to these platforms, you need to understand the unique language of that platform and create for that language, right? And then once you do that, you can kind of scale. You can scale it however you need. And to other platforms, you learn all those other languages, right? But I think big vision, we figure out how to execute small, and then you grow bigger. For me, that is 100 times more satisfying because I don't have to lose my characters. I don't have to lose the story world. I don't have to lose the concept. But at the same time, I can execute small. And that's just, I really enjoy having my cake and eating it too, right? And I feel like that's the sweet spot in that, right? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think about us. We, every year we would take pitches at the Great American Pitch Fest.
Sure.
And anybody who wants to make it in Hollywood, they just want to, Hollywood. You're going to have a meeting, and they're going to, what's your log line? And you pitch this tantalizing, hopefully a tantalizing log line, and maybe if they like it, maybe you can tell a little bit more of the story. Well, if people could understand in using some of these different platforms, you get to tell so much more than your log line. So many people with pitches and say, if we only had more time, if you would just read the first 5 pages, or if you could just see what this really is. Well, now you can give that log line in the first 5 pages, 10 pages. You don't. It's big budget, but okay, tell it over the podcast. If you would have told me when you first told me that podcast, fictional podcasts were hitting and people are listening, I'm like, what? They are. People are listening like they listened back in the 1930s. Like you're like, yeah. I'm like, that is awesome. There's another one. Tell the story that way through podcasts. Get your log line and so much more out there. Make it fit into that medium, and then it can get picked up. We have ways.
I think it just highlights like what we've been talking about for many years now about transmedia, because you can lay out a whole story world where you do have a huge macro vision. Where the big offerings you want to get to, but in designing a story world that way, you can easily have those smaller content offerings that just ready to go
Sure.
in your story.
100% right. And I think that what it requires is you have to elevate your own label of yourself above filmmaker, music producer, novelist. You have to elevate yourself above those labels and say, I'm a storyteller. I'm a storyteller first.
Right.
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 And I like, if I need to be able to tell my story, if you're a filmmaker and if you identify as a filmmaker and nobody will make your movie, what you're necessarily saying is that you're letting other people dictate whether you can tell your story or not. And that is like, I don't know, maybe it's just like the libertarian in me or whatever it is. Like, I'm like so philosophically opposed. Listen, if you don't want to pay for my movie, that's totally fine. But if this is a story that's like burning inside of my bones and it's crying out inside of me to be told, why am I going to let some like old studio executive dictate whether that's going to happen or not? Like, I'm going to tell it one way or another. And if I have to then go and pivot and tell it into another format, I'm going to, because I'm going to look at myself first and foremost as a storyteller rather than just a filmmaker or a novelist or whatever. But I think the trick here is we've all seen and we've all felt the pain of, we upload something on YouTube that we think is the greatest thing ever. And then we come back a week later ready to see how it's gone viral and we have 7 million views and it's all crazy, and we look at it and we have 125 views, right? And that's it. Right now, organic growth is a problem, right? Organic growth is everybody feels the pain of organic growth, right? And there's way to promote your stuff and amplify this and to do all that stuff, but it's hard to get an organic audience in these digital platforms because so many people are doing it, right? And so Travis, in the digital space, right? How do you cut through? Like, how do you amplify?
Well, I look at it. I do some sermons and motivational talks, usually at least once a month, right, on
Sure.
Facebook. And I remember I put one out and it only received 500 views. And how it got up to, didn't end up getting to around 1,000, but it got up to 1,000 because Facebook has an algorithm that what you put on Facebook on that platform will only show up to about 2% or less of your audience. Sure. So even if you're maxed out at 5,000, think about that. 10,000, think about that. So I boosted up. I started, I'm going to take $15 to boost this sermon up. And I'm not trying to make money. I want good news, a good word, a motivational message. I want breakthrough to happen for people's lives. But then my message got out to, just by paying and for it to show up in news feeds, to select a targeted audience, to showed up to like 10,000 people.
Sure.
And what was funny is I was seeing that like 10% to 20% would watch it all the way through. So then I started thinking about, like, why am I complaining about 1,000 people watching my video all the way through? There's people who have churches and only 50
Sure.
people can fit in the building, and they do it weekly, monthly, yearly for years and years. I had 1,000 people get a message. Now, if I'm an entertainer and I put something out on entertainment, I want a lot of eyeballs to go to someone, but maybe if I can just get one of those eyeballs to be an executive.
100%. 100%.
I don't need, people have to change their mindset about the numbers and getting caught up in that. In certain instances.
Instagram was talking about taking likes away, taking like the amount of likes away on Instagram. I was so excited about that. I thought that was going to be such a good thing. I don't think they've done it, but I think getting people out of that numbers game is important. Homecoming was a podcast that got picked up and produced as a television show for Amazon Prime, a streaming series. And what was interesting, it didn't have a massive audience, but one of the people who listened to it was Julia Roberts. And Julia Roberts loved it, contacted the creators attached to it, and made it into a TV show, right, with her attachment. And so I don't care if 50 people listen to your podcast. If one of those people is Oprah, then and she loves it, then all of a sudden, that's a game changer, right? And so that can be, that's a thing. That's absolutely 100% a thing, right? And because we see all these people on social media and et cetera. But this, I think, when we're talking about aggregating audience and the importance of aggregating audience, if you look at YouTube and Instagram primarily, it's like organic growth is very difficult to get. And podcasting is starting to get oversaturated in the same way. This, I think, is the importance of TikTok. Is you always have to, one, don't go all in on just one of these platforms. I think creating an ecosystem within these platforms is super smart, and contextually connecting them together. Make a transmedia project out of a podcast, TikTok, YouTube, and short stories and Wattpad. So have different stories be told in all of the different mediums, but have the additive comprehension connect them all into its own little ecosystem. So all of a sudden, people may not know about
it's important because, like you said, unfortunately, it is a numbers game to some extent. So if you just have the same offering that you're pushing to all the platforms, you're cannibalizing your impact.
Sure.
But if you're able to tell the different stories that are connected, then if someone likes what you have on YouTube, they're probably going to follow your links and go watch the other part of it that's on Instagram and keep going along to all the different platforms.
I should have, just in all this pandemic COVID-19 stuff, I put up a video of me dancing, and my wife told me my butt looked nice, and then I put up a video. I said, butt affirmations make a man in his 40s dance. Now, after I got a number of shares, it didn't go like super viral, but it went viral within my community, and people who knew me and got a ton of shares, more than I thought it would. I just did it as fun. And I was like, you know what? I should have got a nice track out there, recorded the song in my garage, and made it my own song, then put it up on TikTok and put a challenge for 40-year-olds to keep dancing, 100%. And then they can interact with their kids, and because everybody wants to say, I'm 40, I still got it. I want to show my kids I still got it. And that's when you're thinking like that, folks, that's how things can go viral. It doesn't cost a lot of money to make a song. If I don't have a beat, I can go pay someone $150 on SoundClick and get a hot banging track, create my own artistic flair. Because, I was able to put it down. I'm 40. If anyone goes to my Facebook, they will see that, I can still beat a few 20-year-olds out there. Brad, sometimes if you don't toot your own horn, sometimes there's no music playing.
That's it, right? So some of my favorite TikToks are Shaq dancing with his kids, right? Like those are just great videos, right? So, but I think you're right. The storytelling, though, Brad, it changes. This is the importance of telling different stories in these different mediums. What the story that works in podcast, the platform medium podcast, that's not necessarily the same story that's going to work as a short story, right? It's not necessarily going to be the same story that works as a web series, right? All these different platforms have their own language, and so if you have to learn the new language anyway, just figure out how to express a different story, but then create the additive comprehension, which incentivizes the migration of the audience, and then create that ecosystem. So if people stumble upon a story on Wattpad and never heard of your podcast, if their story is then extended into podcast, and you can get those 3,000 people that read your Wattpad story to go listen to your podcast, all of a sudden you have 3,000 more podcast listeners and then let's say you already had 500 podcast listeners. Now you have 3,500 podcast listeners, and that's better than 500. And if those 500 people then flow back to your Wattpad short story, now you have 3,500 Wattpad readers. And if you can get all those people to then migrate back over to YouTube, all of a sudden now you've spiked you've spiked your YouTube as well, and you create the ecosystem. But the key, I think, is to always make sure you have one foot in the platform that has the most organic growth right now. It used to be Instagram. Well, it used to be YouTube, and then it was Instagram, and then it scales and matures. Everybody goes to it, commoditizes, and now it's TikTok. TikTok right now is the only platform on earth that you could post something and then come back like the next day or two, and there's 100,000 people that have seen it. Right? Like it's. And listen, there's a lot of problems with TikTok too. I'm not saying TikTok is awesome. It's owned by a Chinese company. They do some funny things. YouTube is trying to make sort of a TikTok-ish thing that is like a version of it. I don't know if it works. But TikTok has massive organic growth. And it's going to get to a point to where it's not just 12-year-olds doing TikTok. Now everybody's going to do a TikTok, and organic. They're going to have to add an algorithm, and it's going to kill the organic growth. But then there'll be something new that pops up. I think you always have to create. You have to create an ecosystem into the tried and true YouTube, podcasting, things like this. Like figure out the tried and true, but then always have that one foot in the thing that has the most organic growth. Because if you look at that as the top of the funnel, then all of a sudden, if you get 100,000 people that watch your TikTok, and then you can get half of those people to go check out your podcast, then all of a sudden now you go from 500 people listening to your podcast to 55,000 people listening to your podcast. All of a sudden now that changes the podcast game really fast, right?
And I would even tell, even though TikTok is the Gen Z, but I think I was reading today, it's only like 40. They have the highest percentage, which is like 45%. But then what is that other demographic? That means there's older people. You got The Rock on there. You got Will Smith. You got an older demographic getting on there. So you want to be first to market, if you will. And there's people doing skits. So you can have something on Wattpad, and then you can have it integrate into skits on 1 minute short skits on TikTok to be continued. So there, you want to leverage that, and you don't want to just say, "Oh, it's just for young people." People are people. Young people are eyeballs, and young people.
That's what everybody said about Instagram. Everybody said the exact same thing about Instagram. It's just for teenagers, just for teenage girls. And look how that's changed just within a year or two. Yeah. This is just what happens, right? I mean, the most trending thing right now on Instagram, like the people, the demographic that's taken the most selfies on Instagram, women 45 plus. Cougar selfies are like the number one thing on Instagram right now, right? And 2 years ago, you would have predicted that, right? Like the same thing with Facebook. Remember when Facebook was just for college kids, right? Now all of our grandmas are on Facebook, and this is just the way it is. And so all these things scale up, and then once they scale up, then they get oversaturated. They have to institute an algorithm that kills their organic growth, right? Doesn't mean you shouldn't use them, but you always need a top of the funnel platform. I think that gets the organic growth. LinkedIn and TikTok are two of the best organic growth you can get right now in the market. And if you can figure out how to funnel that back with good storytelling and additive comprehension, telling different stories in different mediums, and you extend that story over and over and over again, all of a sudden, I think it's going to be interesting. And I think there's room to innovate TikTok. Listen, I'm not like you, T-Rev. I don't do dances. My wife will dance and do funny things, and her and my daughter will do the cool dances. You'll probably never see me dance on TikTok. But I've been thinking about like interesting things, because TikTok, what are they? The 30-second videos, Job? What are they? Like
1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute, right?
What you get 1 minute.
So I think you could do an interesting thing, like what if you did a like 1 or 2 lines of a book, or like 3 lines or 4 lines or of a book, and just like put that out, right? And have some cool music behind it, 4 lines. And I bet, and this is something maybe I'm just going to put in the universe. Lord will hear it. Maybe we'll do it. But I think it would be cool to publish an entire book on TikTok. Like just like every day, put out the next 3 lines. right? The next three lines, the next three lines, the next three lines, right? And I think, you know, slowly maybe that builds. People get so hooked, they're looking for that next thing that next day, right? And there's such bite-sized things like who knows if that'll work? But that's a neat idea that would literally
people do sit on there. No, people
cost
do
$0.
sit on there, and they'll give a little mini dissertation or their thoughts on something from young to older kids, and I'll sit there and watch them. Wait, what does this person have to say? So if you're delivering parts of a story, and there's that to be continued, there's a way to hook. We love stories. Our brains are hardwired for them. So release that story. I think you're onto something.
And what I think people don't want is their humility. And we'll take it full circle here, guys. There's a lack of humility where they don't want that micro loss of what if it doesn't work, right? Like, what if it doesn't work? Does that mean I'm a failure? Does that, like, whatever? Like, for me, like, it costs $0 to do that, first of all, right? All it's going to cost is a little bit of time, and it may not work. But at this point, I'm willing to take micro losses. We have to get over that lack of humility, and we have to understand the life of. This is something we always talk about. If creators had the mindset of an entrepreneur, they build their entertainment brands differently. And the mindset of an entrepreneur is they understand micro failures. They understand how to try something that doesn't work, pivot. Try something doesn't work, pivot. Try something doesn't work, pivot, and do that like time and time again. Creators, we're such artists. We're so precious about our art, like Gollum is to the One Ring. Like we think we can't take judgment. Artists are softer people in general, and we get our feelings hurt easier, right? And especially any sort of criticism of our art is then a criticism on us and what's inside of our soul, and like this is just part and parcel of it. But entrepreneurs, this is why I love working with people in the music industry, especially in the hip hop culture, is that there's a hustle that goes along with hip hop. That like you were saying, Brad, about MC Hammer hustling his tapes all around all around town. Like you have to have that entrepreneurial hustle in today's creator game as an artist.
Yep.
How do we create those artists who are also these entrepreneurs? And if you can marry them both, then all of a sudden I think you have something pretty cool and pretty magical. So I don't know. I'm
solid right there.
But I think Brad, like it's really super astute that you bring up that the scripture out of Luke. There is a spiritual principle to seed time and harvest, to planting a seed. And when you plant a seed, something doesn't grow big right away, right? Like there's something of starting small and cultivating the small, but with a big vision, right? So if I plant like a corn, right, or an apple tree or an oak tree or whatever, right, I don't expect that to stay tiny. I have the big vision of what this thing is going to grow into, but I understand it's going to take patience in the process to be able to grow into that. Right. And if you can
it's the same dedication on the small level that you're going to need to carry through until you get to the large level.
100%. I get fired up about this stuff.
That was a great scripture. I liked it. That was timely, poignant, my friend.
I get worked up about this stuff. I'm like sweating here in my room because I'm in the desert in the Star Wars land, I guess. But like this I'm telling you, this fires me up. It's this whole coronavirus thing, resetting the board, and it's going to be mentality like this that give people the advantage to rise out of the ashes of the industry to become the phoenix. And our company, we're going to be part of that crew. But there's so much opportunity for everybody else. And this is the thing that I love about our heart is we want to create our competition. We're not like weird and like holding secrets behind. We want to empower creators to be able to leverage this thing because all the boats rise together when the whole tide rises.
Absolutely.
Right? So
absolutely. It's just about thinking, hey, make your story really stinking big, like the book says.
Sure.
And if you don't have deep pockets and don't have the eyeballs, execute small, take those mini stories, hit the different platforms, be humble enough. Another big topic that we had, be humble enough. And like the scripture you shared, do a lot with little, and you'll be surprised what will happen. And if it doesn't work, pivot. I mean, the first time I hit on my wife, I was like, hey, when she wasn't my wife, I said, you're beautiful. You want to go out for coffee? She said, get the heck away from me. And she had some choice words that were worse than that. Really hurt me as an artist. But I went and did my studies on like women from overseas, and I figured out they like tea. I came back like
Really?
a week later. I rethought about this. Would you like some herbal tea, black tea? You know, but I tried for that.
Black tea.
You know, but did a little joke there. Yeah, but it worked. She thought it was cute. I pivoted.
That's
You
it.
got to pivot, people.
That's good work, Trav. I like the T-Rev recap. We need to make that sort of a standing segment. Give us the T-Rev recap. You tie it all in a bow.
Yeah.
There it is.
Funny story.
Let's bring it home
at the end. So,
nice.
So listen, guys, I really appreciate you all putting your thoughts into this. This is such an important topic. And so if you're a creator out there, if you're a novelist, if you're a filmmaker, if you're a music producer, whatever that you're doing, leverage everything as that you can, but with always a big vision of where it can grow. So I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the audience. Subscribe to our YouTube page. Check out our podcast. We just launched the podcast. Check out our website. Has all our content there. And then watch the Bengals on Thursday night. Draft Joe Burrow #1 and start a new era in Cincinnati football.